Now I know what you're thinking, another season of Love is Blind. I'm so excited, not only for the contestants, but for Nick and Vanessa Lachey. No? Nobody's excited for that? Oh, okay. What's going on, everyone? James here with another real recap and review of, yes, Love is Blind, and we're getting into the very first week of Season 5. I almost feel like Love is Blind Season 4 was yesterday, but hey, we're getting a tight turnaround on these seasons because Love is Blind is the penultimate Netflix reality television series, and I'm excited to come back and talk all about these first 4 episodes. Now, y'all, first of all, thanks to Netflix for sending me these episodes early because I did need time to process after I watched what I just watched with week 1. This season of Love is Blind takes us to Houston, Texas. As the experiment continues to expand, each participant's individual journey, emotional growth, and ability to embrace a new approach to dating is key. And, well, it's not as easy as it sounds. Not only will the season test their personal resolve, the connections they built in the pods, but also it challenges some of our contestants to possibly leave their exes behind. Yeah, heavy on the exes part, because Netflix definitely throws us a curveball during this first week of episodes. Now, before we get into my spoiler-free and spoiler-filled recap, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies, TV, and all the news in between. So if you do too, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, tap on the bell, join the Real family, and hit that thumbs up button if you are a big fan of Love is Blind. Also, let me know down below in the comments, after you get through the first 4 episodes of Love is Blind, which couple do you think is going to make it all the way to the end? I have a guess, and I think I might be right. Alrighty, you guys, so let's get into my recap and begin with the spoiler-free section. So if you haven't watched the first 4 episodes yet, don't worry, no spoilers. Well, at least for the next 5 minutes. Maybe less. We'll see. There are time codes down below if you do want to get into the spoilers right away. But for now, let's keep it spoiler-free and talk all about why Season 5 isn't actually terrible. I mean, the opening montage is just as silly and spicy as you would expect from Love is Blind, so it sets a certain tone, but once we get in the pods, I was pleasantly surprised with the pacing, and it seems like this show is getting a little bit better. I think Seasons 2 and 3 were really weak. Season 4 was a return to form, and Season 5 seems to be carrying a little bit more momentum in the pods than Season 4 did. Now, were there some lulls? Yes, especially with JP and Taylor's moments. They were incredibly boring. But Love is Blind is Netflix's bread and butter. You can tell from not only the time they put into the season, but also in the production. The editing was so strong, I would say, compared to some of the previous seasons, and it really did help keep the tension alive. Were the musical choices, yet again, something to boast about? Absolutely not. The editing was good, the music choices were laughable, seriously. But the incredibly cheesy and on-the-nose music choices didn't take away from a few oh my goodness moments, especially with the ending of episode 4. Y'all, when they gave us that cliffhanger at the end of episode 4, I was taken aback. Literally, I was laying down on my back watching it, but I was taken aback. I also really enjoyed the diverse contestants that we have this season. There are some predictable matchups that happen with couples, but then there are some others that you didn't really expect. And shout out to the women in science this season. When you get there, you'll know what I'm talking about, but that is really cool, you know? It's different, and also there were some guys that were very heavily invested in science, so it's neat that we have a different pool of candidates that we're not used to. I mean, the candidates that we got in seasons 2 and 3, for example, pretty predictable, and even season 4 there were some predictable choices, but season 5 is at least throwing enough curveballs in this first week to make me feel like this is on par with season 4, and that's a good thing, especially if you saw my recap and reviews for season 4. I enjoyed that season a lot, and so far, so good with season 5. There might be something in that Houston, Texas air though, because y'all, I can't even hold back anymore. I want to get right into the spoiler portion of this video because that's all I got for spoiler-free topics. So again, if you haven't gotten through the first 4 episodes yet, please subscribe to the channel, save this to your watch later list, come back, and join me for this discussion, because it's time right now to get into the spoiler-filled recap and review for Week 1, Episodes 1 through 4 of Season 5. Yo, I just... Some of these pod connections make sense, and then the others, just... why? And let's begin with our first pod connection, and this is the why connection for me. Taylor and JP. So, on paper, I get it, because they're both kinda awkward, but they're also both just really, really anxious to fall in love, especially Taylor. Heck, even JP was willing to jump the gun, and he said he'd propose to Taylor right away, and this was during their first or second date, depending on how they edited this together. I'm thinking to myself, homeboy, you don't really know too much about her yet for you to say I'm willing to commit and propose to you right away. Very interesting. But like I mentioned earlier, their moments are a bit boring, and sometimes I don't necessarily love how they piece together their scenes. But I do appreciate how they let JP speak and open up his heart about his upbringing. It just wasn't very nice, it wasn't even bittersweet, it was just kind of sad because he grew up with an abusive mother. But Taylor, being a teacher, she's a good listener, and she's also good at just empathizing with JP in this moment. So for a while I kept thinking, alright, even though they have boring moments, I can definitely see both of them getting engaged and walking out of the pods together. And eventually they say, I love you, and you know how that kind of goes. I don't want to jump and get ahead of myself because we got a section dedicated here to all the engagements and the proposals. But you can probably put two and two together and see what happens. I mean, gosh, that one of the other big takeaways before we move on, though, is JP has an American flag everything. He's got red, white, and blue socks. He's got an American flag handkerchief. I bet that boy's got American flag boxer briefs. I don't want to think about that. Okay, we're going to move on to the next pod connection, you guys. Lydia and Izzy. Okay, just remember the name Lydia, okay? Because we're going to reference Lydia a lot in this section. She's got herself caught up in quite the mess. Like a tornado. Yeah, it's bad. So at first, you can definitely tell Lydia's bringing a big personality into the pods, and she kind of keeps that all the way through, and Izzy is a little bit more reserved. But both are opening up to one another, they both seem friendly, but you can tell Lydia is more in on Izzy than Izzy is in on Lydia. There's even a moment, I made a note here, where when Izzy was asked if he feels that they are the same and have a lot in common, Izzy nervously chuckles and says, that probably isn't a good sign, you know? But Lydia, again, all in on Izzy. I almost said Lizzie. She's all in on Izzy. 100%. He's her number one. But here's the thing, Lydia, you just didn't know Stacy was also in the pods. Well, she did, but she didn't know that Stacy had Izzy as her number one, so Stacy kind of played the game a little bit, but Izzy eventually takes time to think about his connections and eventually tells Lydia, I'm going to move on to other connections. Lydia is heartbroken. The girl is crying. She's upset. Aaliyah's comforting her. It is a big old mess after Izzy says, not you, girl. I'm going on to someone else, and that someone else was, we'll talk about her in a bit, but yeah, Lydia is definitely beside herself. And to be honest, I'm not exactly upset with Izzy's decision to move on because Lydia seemed like she was maybe a little too much for Izzy. Izzy was looking for something a little bit more on the calm side to a degree, and also we don't necessarily see couples that link up early and stick together till the end. We only see maybe one of those couples per season, Tiffany and Brett in season 4 and JP and Taylor in season 5. So was I surprised? No. But was I surprised at who Izzy eventually chose? Yes. But we're not there yet. Let's not skirt over Lydia again because we got Lydia and Milton to talk about. Lydia and Milton. Oh, Lydia and Milton. Side note before we get started here. Did anyone else think that Milton looked just like Donald Glover? I don't know why. He was given Donald Glover vibes. I feel like if Donald Glover were in Love is Blind, it would be Milton. And while Milton is young, he's not a childish person. The man is a geologist. They love geology together. He's incredibly smart. She's also got some wits to her because she mentions that she has 2 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. However, Lydia's a little reserved on the fact that Milton is much younger than she is, and she doesn't usually go for younger guys. However, I do think that Milton is smitten. He even says that he has Lydia as his number one, and they definitely bond not only over geology, but they begin to bond over the fact that they can be vulnerable with one another. However, there was this moment between, I think, episodes 2 and 3 where I noticed we weren't getting a lot of Lydia and Milton in the pods. Eventually they bounce back to them. There's a beach aesthetic. They're on these uncomfortable looking beach lawn chairs, and they seem to be opening up a tad bit more, but I was sort of waiting for that breakthrough. And, well, that breakthrough comes pretty quickly. Milton says Lydia is his number one, and Lydia says that she can see herself marrying Milton. Now, this was, of course, after Lydia gets passed on by Izzy, but there were some other events that took place that I want to talk about, but I also don't want to spoil in this section just yet. Yeah, there's a whole little tiff between them because of someone else's connection. Alrighty, well, I'm going to revisit that, I promise, but let's move on to Johnny and Izzy now. So this is a pairing that I actually thought would work, really, because Izzy and Johnny seem to be grounding one another. Johnny's got a little wild side to her, but for the most part, she's a lawyer, she's grounded, she's willing to put in the work to get to know Izzy and find love. Izzy, on the other hand, really likes Johnny's vibe and apparently likes her voice as well. And they both bond over needing an emotionally stable person, which I laugh about now in retrospect because it didn't seem like Johnny felt Izzy was emotionally stable to begin with. They both share some of their past. Johnny was married once before, which is actually a big deal, and Izzy was engaged once before the pods in this experiment, which is also a big deal. They both have crazy past. Ooh, yeah, they do. Okay. Izzy, on one hand, grew up Jehovah's Witness, which is rough if you know about Jehovah's Witness, and if you know that they can't celebrate holidays and how strict they are, and oh Lord, it is a lot. But yeah, thank God though he got out of that. Yeah. And then when it comes to Johnny, she also has a really rough past because her I think it was her ex-husband, her ex-boyfriend ended up dying of a drug overdose, and it hurt her marriage with her now ex-husband because Johnny reveals that the only person she ever loved was her ex-boyfriend, who was definitely not emotionally stable and in a really bad place, especially with the drug addiction that he was then suffering from. So, oh man, yeah, they got a lot of baggage to unpack. Oh, and then Izzy casually throws out the fact that he finds out his dad was not his biological dad. Well, imagine being a witness to that. Oh, mamma mia. Goodness gracious. Okay, so we're done with our past, right? Let's talk about the present. And it seems like Johnny is head over heels for Izzy, saying things like, "It's you. You're the one," okay? And Johnny, well, here's the thing. She kind of digs her hole a little bit because Izzy is still kind of, hanging on the, well, you were married once thing, so tell me more about that. So she has to dive in that bag again. And Johnny said that her rebound was her ex-husband. Johnny, that is the moment where you lost Izzy. At least one of the moments, I want to say, where Izzy felt, okay, this is not the stability that I was looking for. Johnny, at this rate, though, is she's so in love with Izzy, so you guys can kind of imagine what happens next. Izzy ends up leaving after one of their heart-to-hearts, saying, "Let's call it a night." That is a oof moment if I ever saw one in Love is Blind. And Johnny is thinking about the fact that she just let one of her other connections go. That's right, during this whole ordeal, Johnny was so head over heels for Izzy that she says goodbye to Chris. And I'm not gonna lie, Chris and Johnny, they actually are a good pairing, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it is a shame because, well, Izzy doesn't choose Johnny. Yeah, Izzy doesn't say yes to Johnny, instead says, "You're a good girl. I know you're gonna find love, and then the dramatic music kicks in. Izzy tells Johnny he's moving on to explore other connections, and Johnny is just sitting there in the pods, crying, with an emotional soundtrack behind her, with the lyrics kind of like, I don't know, talking about moving on and stuff. It's, again, such an on-the-nose moment, but I felt bad for Johnny, and then I kind of thought about her leaving Chris, and I'm like, okay, Johnny, you're clearly choosing somebody who is possibly not the best choice for you. You were just swooning over Izzy first, and again, it does stink because, yeah, you say no to Chris. I mean, you just expect Chris to take you back, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But yeah, Izzy moves on for Johnny. Definitely a surprise to a degree, but man, what a mess between those two. Oh, and I kind of like the little drama in the women's living quarters after all this happened, because Johnny said to one of her girlfriends there, if Izzy chooses Stacy, he's gonna regret it. Ooh, Johnny's starting to assert herself, cutting out all the fluff, and says, you know what, if the claws gotta come out, they're coming out. So, alrighty, let's move on to Stacy and Izzy. And this is gonna be kind of a shorter section because, guys, for as much as they were building towards these two, in a way, there was a lack of depth between both of them. That could be the way they edited everything, I don't know, but Izzy is clearly swooning over Stacy. However, they tend to have a very physical connection compared to Izzy and Johnny and Izzy and Lydia. They kind of talk about some stuff where I'm just like, I don't want to know that. You know, y'all can keep that in the bedroom, but why you're talking about that on air, I don't know. But it is Love is Blind, so it's to be expected. Izzy does sort of pick up on the fact that Stacy isn't being very vulnerable with him, and that's something that I thought of too, so I'm kind of glad Izzy called it out. Stacy feels like she wants to establish the fun before all of the layers, and, well, listen, you can't necessarily have all the fun if there are some question marks surrounding your relationship, so I am curious how this will work out because, well, and like I told you, it's a short section, so I'll just go ahead and say that they end up being ones that choose each other, okay? So, it just doesn't feel, though, that Stacy's as serious as Izzy is about Stacy. One of them is getting their hearts broken after this pod moment. I just know it. I don't know what's... I wish for the best, of course, but it feels like Stacy is not going to stick around with Izzy. I don't know why. Also, I gotta point out the fact that, you know, we have another awkward music/poem moment. Apparently, Stacy's big on poems to a degree, and Stacy wrote a poem to recite to Izzy. We hear this poem, and it gives me Kwame guitar serenading vibes. Man, what's gonna happen in season 6? So now let's talk about Johnny and Chris. Now this is a loaded potato of a pod connection if I ever did see one. They both connect emotionally, and they do so in a way where they're sharing their past trauma together. So that can either be triggering for some viewers or not. And in this instance, what I'm about to talk about might be triggering for some users. So again, if you begin to hear what I'm alluding to, you can feel free to maybe fast forward a bit, but yeah, Chris opens up about some stuff to Johnny that made me feel so sad for Chris. He basically tells Johnny that some of the source of his insecurity comes from the fact that he was raped as a teenager, and this just broke my heart. Yeah, that is just, dog, yeah, I don't think we've gotten content, I should say, to feel so heavy on Love is Blind like we did in that moment where Chris opened up his heart to Johnny about what happened in his past. And you can tell that Chris is still affected by it, but I really do hope that he sought after a therapist that will help him work through that, because in a way, and to a degree, I can empathize with Chris. So again, as they're opening up to one another, they're both clearly connecting, and I can see them working out together. I even wrote a note that I can see both of them together. Chris was the first one to say that he's in love with Johnny and can actually see himself marrying Johnny. Johnny reiterates and sort of confirms that she can also picture a future with Chris. So to all of our surprises, I'm sure, what the heck is Johnny doing? Moving on from Chris because she was sold on Izzy. So again, going back to the whole Izzy-Johnny connection in the pods, Izzy moves on from Johnny shortly after Chris was said goodbye to by Johnny. So I'm like, yo, Johnny, what are you doing here? You want love so bad and you had a catch and you just left. And sure, in hindsight, it's easier for us to sort of see these things coming. But man, I just really didn't think Izzy was a good match for Johnny compared to Chris being really the number one for Johnny. That should have just been it. So, well, what happens after that? After Johnny moves on from Chris and then gets dumped by Izzy, basically, they have a conversation together. And this seems to happen almost every season now with Love is Blind, where a backup option for a contestant becomes the primary option because the other person was dumped. And Johnny's sort of stumbling over her words, maybe a little nervous, but says things that definitely don't help her case. Things like, well, Chris isn't very exciting. You don't tell Chris that, but also that's kind of rude. Chris is opening his heart to you, and maybe he's on the more mellow side compared to Izzy, but Chris didn't really take kindly to that. And Chris, of course, tells Johnny and also says in his testimonial interviews that he wants to be with Johnny, but he can't get over the fact that she moved on from him. So Chris leaves that conversation, goes back to the men's living quarters, and the boys start gossiping about Johnny. They all start telling Chris that essentially what Johnny told you is not what was told to the others, or to Izzy primarily. So they all start getting together. Like I said, they're gossiping, and Chris finds out that Johnny's story is not lining up. So more question marks, I'm sure, are swirling around in Chris's mind. So they end up meeting once more in the pods. They sit down, and Johnny's really hoping, I'm sure at this point, that Chris is going to say yes. And actually, I was thinking it would happen too, especially with Chris's lead up to everything he was about to spill. But you know when someone's speaking and you feel like there's a but coming on? Well, yeah, that basically happened here in this moment, because Chris essentially says that he's moving on from Johnny, and a big reason why is because of the fact that she moved on from him and he can't get over that. So I was shocked, literally floored, okay? I didn't expect that at all. So Chris leaves the pods, Johnny's heartbroken once more, but I'm thinking to myself, Johnny, you should have just went with the option that was more emotionally stable. Because Johnny continued to say all along she wanted the more emotionally stable person to connect with, XYZ, and Izzy clearly was not giving you the responses that you were looking for, but she was, I guess, swooning over him. And hey, these things happen on Love is Blind, but Chris moving on. In a way, I was like, good for you. And the last pod connection I want to talk about before we get into a very spicy section is Aaliyah and Uche. Grab your gold chalices, get your popcorn, because from here on out, this is where things get incredibly turned upside down, okay? So Aaliyah and Uche at first, I'm going to start off with my feelings right at the beginning. They're vibing, and I actually really like them together. I have a note here that says that they're my favorite connection so far. I always have to make sure to add that qualifier. Well, so Aaliyah and Uche are great, okay? And it's amazing to see that they are connecting and they're very natural with one another, and you can tell that they're both genuine. Well, maybe one more than the other. I don't know. Uche continues to tell Aaliyah things like, we're leaving together, and they love one another, and it's all getting to be real lovey-dovey until Aaliyah decides, well, I got some secrets I want to share. Aaliyah confesses to Uche that she cheated 2 years ago, or 2 years prior to that filming date, and didn't actually tell her ex about cheating and sleeping with someone else. Whew. And then Uche follows up her confession with one of his own and says he also cheated when he was 18, but he only kissed another person. So Aaliyah, a more recent cheater, I think that was a title of one of the episodes, so you're a recent cheater, and Uche actually says that to Aaliyah. So Uche's sort of grilling Aaliyah, saying things like, you know, I would never do something like that. Why wouldn't you just leave your partner before you sleep with someone else? If your needs weren't being met physically, why don't you just leave? Why did you cheat? So Aaliyah's feeling prosecuted. She goes back to the women's living quarters and is a complete emotional mess. And Uche's actually feeling pretty sad too. And to Uche's surprise, Aaliyah actually left the pods before he could tell her that, hey, thank you for opening up to me, this is a good thing. But Aaliyah didn't hear any of that. Instead, Aaliyah goes and finds Lydia in the women's living quarters. And Lydia's consoling Aaliyah and says something like, I can see so much of myself in you. What does that mean? So eventually Uche and Aaliyah get back in the pods together, and Uche says, hey, I'm sorry for judging you and reacting harshly, and I'm falling for you. So Aaliyah forgives him, and all is great, right? Right? No, not right. Because Uche's got another confession of his own. All the confessions, y'all. Ooh-wee. So Uche reveals that one of his exes is actually in the experiment. He met with him on day 1, and it's Lydia. Gulp. Aaliyah is completely shocked in this moment and could not even find words to tell Uche how she's feeling. But Uche reveals, hey, I dated Lydia in the past, and I'll be honest, we met on the first day and we told each other no. And there was a flashback segment that shows Uche and Lydia in the pods, and Uche actually does tell Lydia that because of the experiment, it wouldn't be smart for them to continue moving on. But Lydia was trying to convince Uche to start off on a fresh slate. Oh, Lydia, that's a little sneaky. I don't know. Don't like that. But they promise that they'll get through this together, and Uche and Aaliyah are good to go. They're willing to put it past them, and they're fine. But they're really not. So now let's get into this segment I like to call Love is Triangle. That's right, because that's what it kind of feels like. So in the women's living quarters, Aaliyah has the conversation with Lydia. A one-on-one. Not many people are around, coincidentally, but Aaliyah is basically trying to get to the bottom of all of her feelings now that she knows Uche and Lydia not only dated recently as I think it was like 3 months prior to this, but they also slept together 3 months ago. So Lydia is sort of oversharing and begins to try and console Aaliyah, almost in fear that she'll lose Aaliyah as a friend. But Lydia is annoying Aaliyah quite a bit. And I can tell because Aaliyah specifically tells Lydia, I don't want to know anything else about Uche. I just wanted to bring up the fact that y'all used to date and sleep together. But Lydia decides to tell Aaliyah everything about Uche anyways. And Lydia was the one who told Aaliyah that they slept together 3 months ago, what car he drives, his physical features and all that. And I'm like, Aaliyah, girl, just get up off the couch, leave. Like, just leave. Stop. I mean, I don't know. I feel bad for Aaliyah. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I do. This is not an easy situation to be a part of. You're caught between a rock and a hard place. That's not a geology joke, I promise. But I just felt like Aaliyah needed to step away from the combo. She said one thing, hey, I don't want to know much about Uche. I don't want to know anything at all. But Lydia continued to tell Aaliyah about Uche. So you know what? That's it. I'm walking away. But that didn't happen. So apparently Lydia then lies to Aaliyah, saying that Uche considered starting from ground zero. Now, Lydia's a little conniving here because you are lying, girl. We have the footage. It was Lydia who wanted to start fresh with Uche, and Uche who said no, that's not a good idea. So in my mind, now maybe I'm putting my tinfoil hat on here, but it almost feels like Lydia just didn't want Aaliyah to be with Uche, like a territorial thing. The reunion will be interesting. So eventually Aaliyah and Uche get back into the pods, and Uche says something that I didn't really agree with. He says, Aaliyah, this is hurting you just as much, if not even more, than it's hurting me. Child, please. This isn't hurting you more, Uche. Okay, you were so content with, sleeping with Lydia 3 months ago and then moving on and not necessarily understanding the implications, because he wanted to skirt past this really fast with Aaliyah, and Aaliyah's clearly not over it now that she knows everything that she knows. So Aaliyah takes offense to that, which I'm glad she sort of stood up for herself and said, hey, you don't know how I'm feeling right now. I am the one who has to go to the women's living quarters and see your ex, who you recently were with before this experiment. So how does Aaliyah know that Uche really is over Lydia? It's gotta be a lot for her to consider. But then we forgot about another pair that's affected by all of this. That's right, Lydia and Milton. Milton unknowingly is catching strays as a result of this entire love triangle here. So, yeah. Lydia tells Milton that she ended things with Uche in their previous relationship, and Milton at this point didn't even know that Uche was Lydia's ex, which totally blows his mind. And here's the thing though, Lydia tells Milton that, but Uche told Aaliyah that he's the one who ended things with Lydia. Who's right? Who's wrong? Please, Nick and Vanessa Lachey, if there's one thing you do at the reunion, get to the bottom of this properly, please. But Milton didn't take the news well, even though Lydia kept telling Milton, hey, I love you and I want to marry you. So they're working through it, right? They got a couple more pod dates after the fact, and it seems like they're starting to get over the hump, and Milton is just starting to get over it when Lydia makes a joke, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, Lydia, stop talking. Lydia says, if you have any doubts, Ask Uche. As a joke, sure, but you could tell that Milton was not okay with that joke. So all things considered, you would expect Milton and Lydia to not get together. Well, you'd be wrong. So now let's talk about the proposals and engagements and begin with Izzy and Stacy. Yes, you heard me correctly, you don't have any earwax in your ears. Izzy and Stacy are both engaged and ready for those next steps, I guess, but I don't see it. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here, but Izzy and Stacy I don't see the substance there. To be completely honest with you, Izzy and Johnny had more layers to their connection than Izzy and Stacy. But Izzy gets down on one knee, proposes to Stacy, and she says yes. So when Stacy gets back to the women's living quarters, the editing is really messy because they continue to cut to Johnny's reaction. And Johnny admittedly is not crying in that moment, but in the testimonial, Johnny was bawling her eyes out and is blown away and so sad that it was Stacy after all for Izzy. That's gotta be tough to witness. Yeah. And the next proposal and engagement is JP and Taylor. That surprises no one. Although I was actually really pleasantly surprised with JP's vulnerability and tender side to his personality, because during his proposal speech, he was crying and it was so sweet. You could tell it was genuine. And you know what? I don't know. Right, they seem so nice, you know, as individuals and together, so I kind of want them to work out. And the third proposal and engagement is Milton and Lydia. After everything we just talked about, does that surprise you? Okay, if the answer was yes, I agree with you, because it is surprising. Milton was leading us on like he was gonna walk away from Lydia, and eventually Milton gets down on one knee and says, "Do you take me, Donald Glover, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Joking. But Lydia is, of course, over the moon. She wanted someone to propose to her. And I word that very carefully to say this. Lydia, I don't think, had Milton as her number one. But does Milton know that? I don't think so, yet. This might come out when they go and they evidently have that pool gathering together. And a lot of certain drinks are flowing. But yeah, I don't think that's going to bode well for them. And the last proposal and engagement, well, actually just proposal, is Uche getting down on one knee for Aaliyah. However, Aaliyah's not in the pod. So we're all looking around. Where's Aaliyah? Where did she go? She's not sleeping on the couch. And she's definitely not in the women's living quarters. So where's Aaliyah? Well, Uche's probably just as confused as we are. And then a voice comes over the speakers. Uche, Aaliyah has decided to leave the experiment. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? Netflix, you did it again with the teases and then the tension and then the surprise reveals with Love is Blind, because, wow, I didn't expect that. Uche didn't expect that. So where is Aaliyah? I guess she just left? Like, is Uche gonna have a dramatic moment maybe later on where he gets on the phone with Aaliyah and convinces her to come and meet him somewhere and they have a talk at a coffee shop? Who knows? But what I do know right now is that Uche wanted to propose to Aaliyah, but Aaliyah probably couldn't deal with the fact that Uche and Lydia were a thing very recently. You know what? In a way, I don't blame Aaliyah, because you think, okay, if someone just got out of a relationship 3 months prior to the show, are they here for love? Or are they here for the experiment and the screen time? And then Aaliyah, of course, doesn't want to be a rebound, so I don't blame Aaliyah, is what I'm trying to say. But what do you guys think? Do you think that was a smart choice for her to leave the experiment? So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review and recap of week 1 for season 5 of Love is Blind. The first 4 episodes were a blast, but I want to hear from you, alright? Love is Blind fans, get loud down below and let me know what you think of these first 4 episodes. Did you love them? Did you hate them? Are you in the middle? And what do you think of our couples? Who survives and who doesn't? I'm curious also about your thoughts on the whole Uche, Lydia, Aaliyah thing. That's so messy. And hey, if you haven't already, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, y'all, so you don't miss out on my week 2 recap and review next week. That's right, because the release schedule is very interesting. But next Friday, we're right back here on the channel where I'm talking all about episodes 5 through 7. Alrighty, y'all, again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening. Oh my. Good thing I got therapy next weekend. Might need to tell my therapist, hey, Love is Blind, it triggered my anxiety.